Things that are not in the previous slide. You can read those. I'm not going to read them to you. Anybody have any questions on that list?
I'm actually confused about this slide. These are things that we don't want board members to be, or do?
Yes, you don't. The ideal board candidates are not relatives and friends. They're not people looking for a quid pro quo. They're not the people that can give you major dollars.
Why not?
Because you want workers, and people typically that can give you major dollars don't give you major dollars.
So you want them to know those people, but not to be those people.
Right.
Okay, so the conventional wisdom, get that person on the board, he's got lots of money, he'll give it to you. You're saying no.
Doesn't work typically. May work in once in a while, but not very often.
I've always kind of questioned that.
I'm working with an organization now that has Donald Trump on their board. I don't want to say anything more. That organization has a $25,000 give or get for board members. So guess what they get? $25,000. What could he give if he really had a passion? And we see that a lot. Comment back here?
Kind of starts to create a conflict of interest. You know, guys who you're thinking has lots of money, get them on the board. If you're wanting lots of money, you want them to work. If that's not fostered the right way, it's going to go sour. So
Yeah, it's not gonna work typically. Not gonna work. Any other? Yes. You want me to comment on it?
Yeah.
Okay. People that represent a constituency served. Again, that was to the point that was made earlier, that better to put those kind of people on a resource board or have them as a member of a working committee or something like that. Typically, particularly with smaller boards, you don't want to take up a space.
The downside of them taking up that space.
I'm sorry.
The downside of them taking up that space, why don't you want a constituent member on the board? I didn't understand that.
Well, I did.
What's the negative thing about having somebody, if you have a pun, that's a problem, but if you have an individual who represents the constituency, I'm not averse to what you're saying, but I didn't quite understand why that's such a negative.
Well, you can get the same thing from that individual by using them in a different place. Just by virtue of making them a member of the board doesn't make them any more valuable to the organization.
It seems a little condescending, though, as though they don't have something to bring to the board, or there's something about it that kind of doesn't resonate with them.
I guess is the issue they shouldn't be a constituent, or the basis for having them on the board?
The basis for having them on the board,
They have skill set.
if they have something they can bring to the board, yes. Go back to an organization serving homeless people. There is little value, in my opinion, to bringing a homeless person onto your fiduciary board when you could bring them onto your resource board or your advisory board or your program committee or whatever. You can get just as much out of them, and you've taken up a board slot with somebody that's not going to bring any other resources to the table. If you want to do it, and again, I go back to the if it ain't broken, don't fix it kind of thing. If it works for you, do it.
Thank you.
You're not going to lose by doing it. Maybe. You know, you got to look at a number of different factors, and
I mean, I would echo Bart's point from earlier. We had an all-court board meeting at one point with the constituent member when we were debating his salary, because it was very difficult to kind of really talk about that and be honest about it. And
can you hear what's being said back there? You know, there's no black and white in this game, and it really comes down to the individuals that are around the table and what they see as important. We can only tell you, you know, what seems to work and what doesn't.
I think beyond awkwardness, because we have to deal with
Yeah.
awkwardness, I feel like even though we probably all are doing work that we want to be doing because it's important and we want to help people, but we have a motivation, and so we have a board of directors because we want something, and we put people on that board to get it. And so maybe making the distinction between a fiduciary board and an advisory board, both are as valuable, but where are you putting the people who are gonna, and I don't mean this in a cutthroat way, but how are you using the people who are in your board to the best of their ability, and having someone from your neighborhood trying to decide how much to pay your executive director isn't using them in the best way.
Well, there isn't a Major League Baseball team in the American League that has a designated hitter that's a fan. A fan. In other words, they're not putting a fan in the dugout to be, and they certainly listen to their fans in terms of, and understand the needs of their fans in shaping their programs. You have very precious few seats available to you for your board. Very few, and typically as an organization, so.
I just wonder, based on the size and the type of organizations that are represented here, if it might be helpful for you to get maybe do a better show of hands, like how their boards are just roughly constructed. We have, as the APE, we have one board, and everybody's pretty much, gets all the same information. There are committees made up of that board, but we're not the size of an organization that has just fiduciary board and then advisory board that we're the one board is it, and it's everybody.
Yeah.
They serve. We there's the distribution of labor. But think of Eastern University. We have a relationship with. I mean, they do have boards that have separate responsibilities and separate meetings.
Yeah.
And so it makes sense to talk about having somebody serve in one capacity where they wouldn't be viewing somebody's salary and having to, so
Yeah.
I don't know enough about the board makeup of everybody here.
Well, my guess, I'm sorry, I was just going to say, my guess is that the boards are typically pretty small, and there probably aren't many organizations in the room that have several committees, maybe a few. Am I wrong? I'm making that assumption. And there's probably not more than one or two that truly, at this stage of their development, would benefit a whole lot from this two-tier board arrangement, other than for purposes of maintaining what I call the fundamental philosophy of the organization. One of the big risks in Christian ministries is when you grow your board, every time you bring somebody else on your board, you're diluting the founding philosophy. In other words, if a founder founded an organization and there were 2 or 3 people on the board, eventually you're going to get to a point as your organization grows where the votes are going to outweigh the founder's prerogative. And the way that you protect that is you keep the fiduciary board very small and you create a 2-tier board where you have your working resources at a tier that has no fiduciary power. And so it may be that just knowing that, gotcha, Jim, just knowing that will help in the future.
I hear what Bart and some of the others are saying. I think that just sticks with some of us who come out of a mindset that we're in this together, a mindset that's respectful, and a mindset that says that the people affected get to be part of the decision making. So I see both sides, and it's just a little hard to embrace that, I think, for some of us.
But you don't have to embrace it. That's the point. You have the freedom to say we want to do it this way, and until it stops working, we're going to do it that way. I mean, we're not advocating, we're just putting things on the table that, from our experience, that we've seen. And for the most part, what we've seen is organizations with numbers of people, maybe not even huge numbers of people, that are drawn from the community are less effective than organizations that use those people and employ them in a different capacity within the, that's all.
I guess the hope is that by organizations that may have one of the people they're serving on the board is that that person represents the people they're trying to serve and
Yes.
that voice at the table.
Yeah.
But I wonder if there aren't other ways, and you've mentioned some ways that could happen. If they're really serious about that, they structure something that ensures that the board is listening to this group of people that represents the community.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And the other thing is that from our experience, or at least from my experience, what I found is that every staff that I've ever worked with knows the constituency inside and out. And in many ways knows the constituency better than some individual people they might bring in and put on the board, because they're on the front lines every day.
Yeah, and not to belabor the point, but the other thing is when you talk about what the percentage of things the board should be concentrating on, typically when you have constituent representatives, the place where they're most interested in having input is programmatic. They're most interested in influencing the kind of services that the organization is providing and making sure that the organization's direct relationship with the community is healthy and right. And so that again, they're really useful. And you want your staff to have a committee of constituents that's listening to and responding to. But that's not really where the board's spending most of its time, is on day-to-day programmatic operations. It's just not maybe the best use of them.
Yeah, I mean, they can have probably a greater impact on the program committee of the board if there is one.
Because at the end of the day, the board is responsible for the strategy, the policy, and the finances. The fiduciary responsibilities of the board have to be maintained because externally to the state or to whomever, the board is accountable for what that nonprofit delivers.
And to the donors. The board's more accountable to the donors than it is to the constituents.
One more comment and then we're going to have to break for lunch.
And it's also sort of a question for those who do have constituents, because I know our hesitancy at Cabrini Green has always been at the programmatic level. If we have constituency representation and let's say we are discussing a programmatic cut and we say, well, let's look at the eviction defense program, maybe that we need to cut that, and a constituent raises their hand and says, oh no, in my community that's number one, you can't cut it. It's very hard to continue the dialogue. I think when somebody sort of takes this position, I know the community, I represent the community, here's my one opinion, in how do folks who may not have that level of, so we try to find other ways, I think, to provide that input from the community that won't squelch the conversation.
I don't think I need to say much more about this slide than when you're recruiting board members, tell them the truth, tell them what you expect of them, and you'll find that they'll end up being better board members. Now we're going to come back in a later presentation tomorrow and talk about more on boards, which will drill down into a lot of this stuff and share a lot of the tools with you. We're going to break for lunch now. Bart, I don't know if you would like to offer grace before lunch or whatever?
No. Here's what we're going to do for lunch. James and Robert, check me on this. Lunch is not going to be around here.